Amber Belken came into the world on December 6, 1981, in San Antonio, Texas. Raised as an only child, she received endless affection and care from her parents. From a young age, Amber displayed a profound kindness toward animals. She often rescued stray creatures, not just cats and dogs, but turtles, frogs, and almost any creature she encountered. Her parents permitted her to keep them all. As time went on, she resolved to become a veterinarian. After graduating high school, she planned to head to college. But first, she chose to save up some funds, so she accepted a position at a video game store. Amber soon proved herself reliable and hardworking, and before long, she received a promotion to store manager. She held that position for about 3 years, and in 2007, at age 25, she at last enrolled in veterinary classes at a local college. On January 29, Amber was set to open the store for her shift. But for reasons unknown, she failed to show up. As the manager, she was usually the first to arrive. That morning, however, nobody heard from her. When corporate noticed the store remained closed, they tried calling Amber, but she didn't answer. They even rang the store's landline, with no response. As a result, they reached out to a nearby location and requested an employee to swing by and investigate. An employee named Giovanni volunteered to check it out. When he got there, the store was pitch black. The doors were secured, the lights were extinguished, and it looked like no one was present. He circled the building and peered through the windows but spotted nothing out of the ordinary, so he departed. He then reported back to management what he'd seen. They kept attempting to contact Amber, but still got no reply. Hours slipped by without any word from her, and around noon, they called the sister store once more and asked Giovanni to return for another look. Giovanni went back to the location, but this time things felt off. The lights remained dark and the doors locked, yet when he looked inside through the glass, he noticed someone there. It was a fellow employee named Brandon. Brandon let him in, and right away Giovanni observed the chaos. Game cases and merchandise littered the floor. The cash register stood open, with bills strewn across the counter. It seemed the place had suffered a burglary. Oddly, though, Brandon behaved as though the mess escaped his notice entirely. Giovanni headed to the manager's office to check the safe, where the prior night's deposits were typically stored, but the instant he pushed the door open, he froze. There on the floor lay a body, a plastic bag cinched tightly over the head. Giovanni promptly alerted the police, and officers reached the scene soon afterward. Investigators swiftly identified the victim as Amber. After examining the store, they arrived at what at first appeared an evident conclusion: she had been slain amid a robbery. The cash register had been emptied, and the office safe stood completely bare. Amber's vehicle remained parked right outside. The doors were unlocked, and her cell phone sat on the seat. Those details only raised more questions. Why would she leave her car unsecured with her possessions inside? Another confusing element was how the perpetrator exited the premises. Both entrances had been locked when Giovanni first arrived that morning. With help from other staff members, detectives established that the thief had taken far more than cash. They also removed around 50 video game discs, an Xbox, and multiple PlayStations, totaling roughly $6,000 in value. As authorities pieced the events together, the medical examiner determined Amber died from asphyxiation. It seemed the assailant employed a plastic bag, holding it over her face until she ceased breathing. Experts estimated the struggle persisted for several minutes, during which Amber fought desperately but could not break free. They noted her hands had been restrained with duct tape at one stage, though the perpetrator probably removed it post-mortem. Detectives spoke with Amber's colleagues and discovered she customarily arrived around 9 a.m., an hour prior to opening. Her daily procedure included retrieving cash from the safe, depositing it at the bank, then readying the store. Evidence suggested Amber reached the location on schedule, unlocked the entrance, and stepped inside. Investigators concluded the attacker struck almost immediately, before she could handle the money. Not long after, a key piece of information surfaced. The manager of another chain location reported speaking to Amber by phone that morning. Their conversation was brief after her arrival, but it ended abruptly when Amber suddenly declared she had to go and disconnected. As more facts emerged, the case increasingly appeared to involve far more than a random holdup. The degree of brutality didn't align with a typical theft. Amber evidently unlocked both the register and safe, so the killer had no need to harm her for access to funds. And if the goal was to eliminate a witness, that rationale fell short too. Robbers in such scenarios generally use firearms or blades. Strangulation, however, frequently suggests a personal element. Moreover, authorities suspected entry via the rear door, which prompted additional concern. That exit faced an alley filled with similar back entrances to adjacent businesses. Without prior familiarity with the area, identifying the correct door would prove difficult. Considering everything, police grew convinced the perpetrator might harbor a personal grudge and could even be a store employee. They now viewed the theft as potentially staged to mask an intentional killing. Still, detectives lacked any solid physical proof. Unlike other branches, this store had no security cameras. And despite a meticulous search by forensics teams, no usable fingerprints or DNA turned up on the bag or Amber's remains. Yet by then, investigators already had a person of interest, Brandon. Recall he was the individual Giovanni spotted inside during the second visit. Brandon stood in the darkened space with the door still locked, seemingly unbothered by the disarray or the open register. He also informed police he hadn't entered the manager's office and hadn't discovered Amber's body. According to Brandon, he showed up for his shift shortly before Giovanni's arrival. Seeing the lights off and doors secured, he figured he'd misread the schedule, perhaps opening fell to him. So he entered and encountered the mess. Rather than panicking, he assumed the closing shift left it that way and began fretting he'd take the blame. Brandon maintained he played no role in Amber's death, insisted he never saw her body, and claimed ignorance of any wrongdoing. But detectives refused to take his account at face value. He knew the premises well and was aware of the absent cameras. Furthermore, they uncovered a possible motive. Amber's relatives and coworkers informed police she'd voiced complaints about Brandon repeatedly. As her assistant, he frequently underperformed and lacked seriousness about the job. Tensions escalated until she resolved to submit a formal complaint to higher-ups and even requested his termination. Critically, Amber intended to file that complaint the very morning she died. Thus, Brandon possessed both motive and access. Yet police still had zero evidence linking him directly. They secured warrants to search his residence, vehicle, and cell phone. Surprisingly, nothing incriminating surfaced. That struck them as peculiar, given the stolen items, nearly 50 discs and 4 consoles, had to exist somewhere, yet none appeared in Brandon's possessions. Even more telling, phone records placed him nowhere near the store until about 2 p.m., while Amber perished around 9 a.m. Additionally, he offered an alibi. He spent the morning assisting his fiancée and her family. When police verified, everyone corroborated his story. Nevertheless, investigators hesitated to clear him fully. For days they scrutinized the alibi, seeking any crack that might allow his involvement. Meanwhile, Amber's funeral occurred, and to widespread dismay, Brandon attended. By then, her family knew he topped the suspect list, so his presence felt deeply offensive. In time, though, detectives verified the alibi as ironclad. No possibility existed for him to reach the store that morning. Despite the suspicious signs and odd demeanor, they reluctantly eliminated him and shifted focus elsewhere. They also examined Amber's boyfriend, Fred. Minutes before her death, she'd texted him, "Love you." But like Brandon, Fred possessed an unshakable alibi. Once more, police returned to the beginning. Later, authorities conducted a press conference with Amber's parents, urging anyone with knowledge to speak up. A substantial $100,000 reward was offered, largely funded by the employing chain. In the ensuing weeks, leads flooded in, but each fizzled out. Slowly, the investigation stalled. As months dragged on without progress, detectives wondered if resolution would ever arrive. That persisted for 7 months until a surprising development emerged. Police fielded a call from an anonymous man claiming knowledge of Amber's homicide. Initially vague and reluctant, he eventually consented to meet and disclose details. He stated that the day before the killing, an acquaintance proposed an uncomplicated robbery. He declined and walked away. But the next day, seeing news coverage of Amber's murder, it dawned on him who might be responsible. The connection formed instantly because someone he knew personally worked at the same retail chain as Amber. That individual wasn't Brandon, as one might expect. It was Giovanni. The witness recounted meeting Giovanni the day after the crime. Their discussion turned alarming when Giovanni didn't merely suggest, he outright confessed to killing Amber. The admission left the witness shocked and terrified. Despite the gravity, he delayed reporting to police out of fear. If Giovanni could murder Amber, he might eliminate him too. What lent extra weight was the shared history. The witness knew both Giovanni and Amber closely. All three had once worked together at the same location. That familiarity gave Giovanni insight into store routines, awareness of no cameras, and confidence that Amber would trust him enough to admit him without hesitation. Those factors explained the lack of forced entry or immediate suspicion. Soon afterward, police summoned Giovanni for questioning. In the interview room, he rejected every accusation, adamantly denying any involvement in Amber's murder. Detectives applied intense pressure through various methods, but Giovanni never admitted guilt. Without a confession or concrete evidence, the effort stalled. They released him. Absent physical links, authorities doubted whether the witness's statement alone sufficed for charges and a trial. The district attorney shared those reservations. Upon review, he indicated insufficient conviction that a jury would find guilt based solely on testimony without corroboration. As a final measure, investigators obtained a warrant for Giovanni's DNA sample. The aim wasn't an immediate match, none existed at the scene, but to unsettle him or provoke an error under pressure. They executed the warrant at his residence and collected it. Giovanni stayed composed, continued proclaiming innocence. Then, merely a day later, another detail emerged. Detectives discovered Giovanni had abruptly relocated with his wife and kids to Laredo, near the Mexican border. To police, the sudden move screamed flight risk, hinting he might cross into Mexico. Without firm evidence, however, arrest remained impossible. Now they worried he could vanish across the border, complicating recapture. Over subsequent months, authorities persisted, chasing tips, re-inspecting leads, revisiting prior data, but no breakthroughs materialized. Time elapsed, and a year and a half slipped away. As the case chilled further, it seemed Giovanni might evade justice forever. Then, unexpectedly, a phone call arrived that reshaped everything. It was June 2008, 18 months post-murder, and the caller was Veronica, Giovanni's wife. She explained that initially she'd rejected any notion of her husband's guilt. That shifted the day police retrieved his DNA. Once officers departed, Giovanni told her to pack immediately for a move. When she questioned why, he revealed police suspected him of murder. Veronica confronted him outright. Had he killed someone? He met her gaze and affirmed yes. She knew he meant Amber, but terror prevented challenge. Veronica described Giovanni as consistently aggressive and domineering. He surveilled her relentlessly and wouldn't tolerate refusal regarding intimacy. If she resisted, he'd bind her with duct tape and proceed forcibly, indifferent to their children sleeping nearby in their one-bedroom home. She feared reporting him would cost her life, so she endured in silence, relocated with him, and survived as best she could. Eventually she summoned courage to ask directly about Amber. Giovanni confirmed the killing, claiming it occurred amid a robbery. Veronica urged him to surrender, but he refused. She then demanded divorce and custody of the children. In response, he proposed a calm discussion over coffee. Instead, he drove to an isolated spot, locked the doors, and brandished a firearm. She pleaded for her life, but he disregarded her. He assaulted her sexually at gunpoint, then abruptly handed her the weapon and instructed her to shoot him. Veronica declined. She persuaded him that his death and her imprisonment would orphan their children. He eventually relented and returned her home. The next day, he transported her and the kids to her mother's, then departed. Once alone, Veronica reached out to police. Her account prompted the district attorney to approve an arrest warrant. But a critical obstacle remained: Giovanni's whereabouts were unknown, and investigators suspected he'd fled to Mexico. They enlisted the U.S. Marshals, who added him to their 15 most wanted list and collaborated with Mexican officials for his capture. The effort spanned about a month and a half until Mexican authorities located him at a family member's residence, mere miles across the border. In a bitter irony, upon arrest, he was engaged in playing one of the stolen video games from the crime scene. Under U.S.-Mexico extradition terms, returning him required prosecutors to drop the death penalty option. With no alternative, they consented. Later, they extended a plea offer, as without capital punishment, the district attorney saw limited value in a prolonged trial. The deal stipulated a guilty plea to murder for a life sentence, eligible for parole after 30 years. Giovanni accepted and provided his account of events. He insisted he never planned to kill Amber, aiming only to take cash after recently losing employment. At first, she cooperated, he said. But when she attempted to summon help, he claimed he ended her life. Detectives dismissed that version instantly. For one, Giovanni hadn't lost his job, he remained employed at another store then. Second, the notion of no intent to kill rang hollow. Amber knew his identity. Escape after theft would leave her able to identify him immediately. Giovanni also asserted persistent guilt and thoughts of confessing, yet he prioritized others' needs, whatever that implied. The plea required only a partial admission, leaving certain specifics of that morning unresolved. Ultimately, he received his prison term. His earliest parole consideration falls in 2038. Following sentencing, Amber's parents vowed to oppose any release with unwavering determination. And then there's Brandon, the man initially targeted as Amber's killer. For weeks, authorities scrutinized him intensely, and his loved ones knew of the suspicion. Investigators even pressured his fiancée, questioning how she could share a bed with a murderer and suggesting she might become his next target. Yet police never formally notified Brandon of his clearance. For an extended period, he carried the dread of wrongful imprisonment, while those close to him remained unaware he'd been exonerated. In time, Brandon pieced his life back together. He married, built a family, and in 2018, he rescued a young girl's life. Working as a truck driver then, he spotted a 13-year-old being carried away by floodwaters in an overflowing drainage canal during a storm. Unable to escape alone, she needed aid. Brandon intervened, and with help from others, they provided a ladder for her climb to safety. She required hospital treatment for several days but survived, thanks completely to Brandon. If this case captured your interest, remember to like the video and subscribe to the Hidden Cases files. We share crime stories every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant.